There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Revelation. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store. Okay, so now Satan, he's been thrown down to earth, and he knows he only has a short time left. And that's exactly 1,260 days. And after those 3.5 years, he will not only be thrown out of heaven, but he will be thrown into the abyss, the abuso. And so now Satan, he's frantic. And so he's going to persecute the woman who's Israel. And now all these people, they know that Jesus is the Messiah. And so it says here that the woman is given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. All right, well, this image, this is a repeated image. We've seen this exact image in the Old Testament when God delivered Israel from Egypt in the Exodus. In chapter 19, verse 4, where it says, "You yourself have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." So again, this is another time where God, he will be taking care of Israel as he did from their original Exodus from Egypt. But this time it's going to be an exodus from the Antichrist. And here, where it says time, times, and half a time, well, a time means 1 year. And times, being plural, means 2 years. And half a time means half a year. So that's how they get that 3.5 years, or that 1,260 days. And then it says here that the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. So this looks a lot like that movie, The Mummy Returns, but a lot of commentators, they don't think that this will be a literal flood of water. They think it might be like the Antichrist army, the same way how the Pharaoh had sent his army after Israel back in the book of Exodus. And maybe the earth will open up like it did with Korah, Abiram, and Dathan, where the earth swallowed them alive, which is also written back in the book of Exodus. So if you notice here, a lot of this imagery of what we read in Exodus is the same imagery that we read here in the book of Revelation. So this is what tells us that the book of Revelation isn't really impossible to understand, because most of these symbols, they've already been identified for us somewhere else in the Bible. And since God is protecting Israel, Satan can't touch the woman. And so what he does is he goes against those that he can touch. And they're called here the breast of her offspring, which is believed to be the believing Gentiles who had come to faith in Jesus Christ during the tribulation. And even though Satan, he can kill their bodies here, he can't touch their souls, because they have also overcome by the blood of the Lamb, like we just read about. All right, so here we'll have a little review of where we are in Revelation to this point. Okay, the church has been raptured, the Antichrist has appeared, and he has unified the world, and he makes this treaty with Israel to rebuild their temple. And then during the first 3.5 years, there's these 2 witnesses of Jesus witnessing outside of the newly rebuilt Jewish temple in Jerusalem. And they testified not only by their words, but by these signs and these plagues. And they tell the world that this temple is not approved of by God. And then in the middle of the tribulation, after the 3.5 year point, the Antichrist kills these 2 witnesses, and then the whole world rejoices with them being dead. And then, because they're dead, the Antichrist goes into the temple into Jerusalem, and he demands to be worshiped as God. And that's when these Jews, they realize that they've been deceived by the Antichrist, and where they believe the message from those 2 witnesses, and then they flee from Jerusalem to the wilderness where God protects them. And then we see that the Antichrist, he rounds up all the Gentiles he can find that believe in Jesus, and then he kills them. So although the seventh trumpet has been blown, those bowls of God's wrath, they still haven't been poured out on the earth yet. And before this happens, and before we see this happens, we still have chapter 13 to go through and 14, where we learn about the beast, which is the Antichrist, and then we learn about another beast, which is the false prophet, and that's where the mark of the beast comes out, the 666 that everybody has to receive. And then in chapter 14, we'll see the removal of the 144,000 virgin Jews, where we find them now in heaven. And then lastly, we're going to have this witness of an angel warning the people of the earth not to take the mark of the beast. And then we will start this last 3.5 years with the 7 bowl judgments. So these are very exciting times. I'm very glad that I will get to miss them. And I'll be really glad if you get to miss them too. And all you have to do, if you want to miss these, is you just have to put your trust in Jesus. So last week in chapter 12, we pretty much looked at these 2 signs that appeared in heaven. The first being the woman with child, who we identified as the nation of Israel. And then a red, fiery, multi-headed dragon, who we identified as Satan, also known as the devil and the serpent. And then we looked at their adversarial relationship that began in the Garden of Eden that lasts until Israel flees from the city of Jerusalem during the middle of the tribulation period. So in chapter 12, John's vision was the signs of things that are happening in the heavens. But here in chapter 13, John's view will be the things that are happening here on the earth. And in chapter 13, it starts with, "Then I stood on the sands of the sea, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea." And in our version, it reads as if John is standing on the seashore, and that sea probably would have been the Mediterranean Sea, because that was the only sea that was known during his day. But in some versions, it doesn't say that it's John. In the New American Standard and in the NIV and in the Amplified Version, it says, "The dragon stood on the sands of the sea." But whoever is standing there, this is what John saw. And if you remember, just a couple of weeks ago, the first mention of the beast was coming out of the bottomless pit. But here we see the beast is rising out of the sea. And pretty much everyone agrees that this sea isn't just a sea like the Mediterranean Sea, but what it's saying is that this beast will rise out of the sea of humanity, where here this sea symbolizes the Gentile nations, and specifically the European nations, from where Satan will bring forth his super leader, the Antichrist, who is a human man who is possessed by Satan himself, and he's been chosen among all the people of the earth. And up to this point, the Antichrist, he's only been the head of a 10-nation league, the revived Roman Empire that's made out of these European nations. But now he's going to begin his new career as this new world dictator, the only one with all the power. Because if you remember, the Antichrist started as a peacemaker, where he settled all those Arab-Israeli conflicts with his promise to the Jews of rebuilding their temple in Jerusalem. And he allowed Israel to reestablish their national identity as being Jews, allowing them to return to their roots where they can begin their animal sacrifices again and perform all their rituals. Where it all ends after 3.5 years, where this beast makes himself the god of their worship in the temple. And the word beast here means a wild beast. It's a dangerous animal. And it's that Greek word therion. And if you remember, those 4 living creatures in some of our translations, they were also called beasts, but that was just a bad translation for the word beast, where that word for beast was the word zoan, which means spiritual living creatures. So this beast, he's the dangerous type. He's a wild beast, and he rises out of the sea of humanity, and he resembles the description of that multi-headed dragon that we read about last week. And that's because the dragon, Satan, he possesses this man. So they have the same 7 heads and 10 horns. But here we see that this beast, that he gained 3 more crowns. And if you remember that those 7 heads that we talked about last week, that they were 7 mountains. And that's a veiled reference to the city of Rome, because this is about a Roman Empire. And those 10 horns being 10 kingdoms, which is a 10-nation European Union. And then in verse 2, it says that this beast, he was like a leopard. So it's not saying that he is a leopard, but he's like one. And it says the same thing about his feet, that they were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. So now if you go back to Daniel chapter 7, you'll see this same stirring of the sea, but where Daniel, he just doesn't see one beast like we see here in the Revelation, but Daniel sees 4 beasts. And the first 3 beasts Daniel sees in his vision are the same exact animals that John sees here. But John doesn't see the first 3 beasts that Daniel saw. He only sees their traits. And John is seeing all those 3 beast traits all inside of that one beast that he saw, which is the same as the 4th beast that Daniel saw. And the reason for this is that those first 3 beasts are past. By John's day, those 3 beasts have already been forgotten in history. But here in John, we read the order as a leopard, and then a bear, and then a lion. But in Daniel, the order of these animals is reversed. And that's because Daniel, he's looking forward in time to the things that were going to happen from his day. But John, he's looking back into the past, because the lion, it represented Babylon during the time of Nebuchadnezzar. The bear, it was the Medo-Persian Empire, and that's the empire that replaced Babylon. And then the leopard was Greece, and that's the empire that replaced the Medo-Persian Empire. But that 4th beast that Daniel saw, that he described as a terrible beast with iron teeth, which also had 10 horns, with a little horn coming out of one of the heads and plucking out 3 of the horns, well, that was Rome. And that little horn Daniel was seeing on that 4th beast is the Antichrist himself. So Daniel, he's seeing the Roman Empire, and he's not only seeing it in the past, but he's also seeing the revived Roman Empire with this 10-nation confederation all the way up to the future, all the way into the end times. So Daniel, he's looking from his time forward, where 3 of those powers were no longer in existence by John's day. But John, he's looking backwards, where the only beast that's left to come is in the future, and that's the beast which he sees rising out of the sea. And it has the same attributes as those other 3 world empires of the past. And what they had in common was they all had a one-leader government, a world-ruling dictator. And this is really easy to picture if you look at Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2 of Daniel. You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.